But Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop and the Cameroonian archaeologist Augustin Holl, are African-centered scholars who agree on many central issues. Yet they are often pitted against each other by Eurocentric scholars and tribalist reactionaries who oppose the political implications of Pan-Africanist unity. These reactionaries see the idea of linking the modern material and social cultures of the continent to a classical foundation in the pharaonic civilization as dangerous. They try to claim that Augustin Holl classified all of Diop's work as out of date, often citing perspectives from MacDonald and Howe on Diop's views. However, these arguments ignore the modern development of Diopian scholarship, a topic we will delve into further. Dr. Augustin Holl emphasized Diop's pivotal role in challenging racist colonial historiography within the African movement, noting that the Diopian model of pluridisciplinary analysis was far more complex than the diffusionist paradigm of European scholars. Diop's African origin of civilization concept, which positioned Ancient Kemet at its pinnacle, countered European colonial claims that sought to denigrate Africans. Additionally, Diop confronted various iterations of Marxist, neoliberal, and secular African leaders who opposed radical revolutionaries that advocated for immediate independence from Western imperialist states. Holl further asserted that the earliest instance of archaic state development in Africa was evident in ancient Kemet and the Happy River Valley, providing a foundational understanding of complex societal evolution on the continent. He highlighted the significance of cattle cultures in the Nabta Playa, archaeological record preceding the veneration of Hathor in ancient Kemet, reshaping perceptions of cultural development in northeastern Africa and beyond. The discovery of Barbary sheep dung, dating back to 8 to 8.9 thousand years ago in the early Holocene Central Sahara, indicated advanced animal management knowledge among early Saharan inhabitants, linking pastoral economies between East and West Africa, as evidenced by cattle bones at sites like Uan Muhugiak. Holl's analysis extended to the Middle Holocene, revealing distinct developmental trajectories leading to mixed agropastoral economies in the Eastern Sahara, Dar Tishit region, and Karkar-Chinkat cluster, resulting in larger herds and complex societies with organized infrastructure. Delving into ancient Kemetic literature, Holl drew parallels between the ethnogenesis of the Israelites and the Bagara people of Cameroon, illustrating how migrations profoundly shape ethnic identity formation through foundational events and cultural archetypes. Moreover, Holl traced the origin of modern Lake Chad Basin populations to migration waves from the Happy River Valley, carrying the L3F3 mtDNA haplogroup westward across the Wadi Hawa. These migrants, arriving in Chad around 3,700 years ago, established a tangible link between classical African civilizations and contemporary West Africa. Through Holl's comprehensive analysis of Diop's legacy in light of contemporary scholarship, the interconnectedness of ancient and modern African societies emerge as vital components in understanding Africa's rich historical legacy. There are some areas where Diop and Holl disagreed. Let's review them and discuss who was correct. When it comes to the Melanin dosage test, Holl cited Alain Froment in his questioning of Diop's conclusion. Recently, German scholars have validated Diop's conclusions in a more recent study. During an excavation led by the German Institute for Archaeology in Cairo at the tombs of the nobles in Thebes West, Upper Egypt, various tissues from mummies were sampled. 13 established rehydration methods for mummified tissue were compared with 3 newly developed methods, along with testing 3 fixatives with each rehydration fluid. Tissue samples including meniscus, fibrocartilage, skin, and placenta were utilized. Uniform rehydration and fixation procedures were applied across all methods. In 1997, The German Institute for Archaeology conducted an excavation of the tombs of the nobles in Thebes West, Upper Egypt. Tissue samples were collected from different mummies, including meniscus, fibrocartilage, skin, and placenta. Archaeological evidence suggested that the mummies dated back to the New Kingdom, approximately 1550 Diopian 1080 BC. Skin sections displayed favorable tissue preservation, although cellular outlines were not always distinct. While much of the epidermis had detached from the dermis, the remaining epidermis was often well preserved. Basal epithelial cells were heavily pigmented with melanin, consistent with specimens of Negroid origin. Structures such as hair follicles, hair, sebaceous, and sweat glands were clearly visible in the dermis. Blood vessels and peripheral nerves were identified, although red blood cells were absent. The subcutaneous layer exhibited loose connective tissue fibers and remnants of fat cells. To assess the impact of post-mortem tissue decay by microorganisms, samples were screened for fungal presence using silver staining. In biological anthropology discussions, Holl thought that Diop's statements were too focused on typological arguments. Dr. Shomarka Keita wrote an extensive defense of Diop that was published at Oxford, revealing that he thought in the sense of cladistics, biohistory, and biogeography in his analysis. According to Dr. Keita, Diop was searching for environmental processes that laid the foundation for human social interaction. In this sense, the Diop accurately located the pharaonic civilization as the pinnacle of the African socio-cultural universe. The main controversy here is the specific connection between the pharaonic civilization and contemporary Africans. Dr. Shomarka Keita, in his analysis of dental, cranial, brachial, crural, and intermembral indices, reveal that the populations of pre-dynastic and dynastic Kemet had tropical body proportions and were closely related to modern Africans and African Americans. Dr. Chishkova et al.'s analysis of maternal genetic structure in the Sahelo-Savannah belt unveils a pattern of haplotype sharing between Eastern and Western African pastoralists, commencing in the pre-dynastic Hopi River Basin and intensifying notably in the 7th century during the onset of the Islamic period and Arabic immigration. The analysis of circum-Saharan maternal lineages by Dr. Mame Yoro Diallo et al. Reveals that modern West Africans are connected to both pre-dynastic and dynastic Kemet via intracontinental pastoral migrations from Northeast Africa to the Western Sahel during the late Holocene. Another major disagreement between Holl and Diop was the migratory origin of modern West Africans from a Happy River Basin continuum. Though Holl agreed that certain elements of West African societies originated from Northeast Africa, he didn't think it was necessary to affirm this for all West Africans in light of historical, linguistic, and archaeological data. The analysis of modern Diopian scholars in the 21st century is extremely important in clarifying this distinction between Diop and Holl. Dr. Babakar Bouba Diop published an analysis of Serer history in the Online Journal of Egyptology and African Civilization. In this study, he examines the cultural characteristics of the Serer people found in the northern regions of Senegal, Wallo Wallo, Jambonambur, Futanke. The analysis extends to the Sudano-Sahelian, Saharan, and Nilotic regions, exploring the migratory patterns that led the Serer people to settle along the Atlantic coast of Africa. What we aim to do is to delve deeper into the study of these migrations and provide some additional insights before reaching the final stage, the Senegambian phase. And to accomplish this, our research in ancient civilizations has been immensely helpful. Already in 1962, J. Dosage had published a catalogue of African tribes from classical antiquity to the west of the Nile. The author was aware of the ambiguity of the notion of tribes, the limitations of written sources, and the apparent confusions among different texts. By combining the alphabetical approach from A to Z, from the Bani Abani to the Zimizes, and the geographical approach from the Mauritanie Tingitane on the Atlantic coast to the tribes of Inner Ethiopia, sub-Egyptian, we were able to compile a list of over 250 groups, tribes, ethnicities, clans, families. Among the groups that stand out in terms of volume and quality of information that we can gather, we can mention the Garamantes, the Nasamans, and the Troglodytes. The only people we believe should be added to J. Dosage's reconstituted and condensed list are the Serai mentioned in Heliodor's text, the Ethiopics. The latter depicts them in combat, charged with covering and defending the elephants of King Hydaspes' army. He also depicts them in times of peace. During a parade, they bring fabrics woven with the thread produced by spiders from their country. They display a robe dyed in purple, another of dazzling whiteness. Heliodore is not the only author to have mentioned them. They are first mentioned in the text by Denis of Alexandria, but situated in Asia. The issue arises as they are mentioned both in Asia, near India, and in Africa. Their name seems to be related to silk production or a sought-after fabric. About 20 years ago, we ventured to draw connections with the Serer people of Senegal while commenting on Heliodorus' Ethiopics under the guidance of Woronov. At the time, only the phonetic resemblance struck us. This ethnic group is one of the oldest in West Africa and appears to have retained in its memory very ancient and complex relationships with other peoples inhabiting the Senegambia, namely the Alpularen, the Lebu, the Juola, the Mandinka, and the Wolof. Additionally, within this group, ethnonyms and surnames seem to be linked to the dromedary, such as the Sa'ar, as in the expression Sa'ar Gilim, Sa'ar Kamel, which enlightens us on the fertility of the Saharan Trail, a trail extensively developed by Father Gravrand in his work Pangool. This trail is particularly indicated as, in myths and legends from Niger, this term often recurs, as in the myth of Malibero. In this text, the young Serere are mentioned several times. They lived near a marsh, challenged the young Maléon, the ancestor of the Zarma. Sombo Mali, that is, Malibero, killed one. This brought the Serere to their senses. The Zarmas took away the spears of the Serere. They built the Fond de Grenier, blows to the Fond de Grenier, followed by incantations, says the text. This document has moreover been exploited by the Nigerian historian Bubegado in a contribution on the hypotheses of contact between the Middle Nile Valley and the region of the Niger River, as well as by Marcel Diouf in his study L'Ensemal. We cannot say for certain whether these Serer are related to the Ser deity of the afterlife in Egypt, Ser the serpent who is in that afterlife, and if all of this is related to Srer or Sru in ancient Metremen Kimie, meaning to turn around, entertain, or Sur in relation to the drum, or even writing, tracing. Were the Serer guardians of land or religious order? The term Ser, with the characteristic reduplication, to designate, in certain African languages, a social group or inhabitants of a region. Could it have given rise to the name Serer, with the loss of the second S, Ser, S, It is probable that the term Serer may have initially referred to a specific social group, first in Pharaonic Egypt, as Cheikh Anta Diop had pointed out, citing an etymology proposed by the Egyptologist P. Pierre. He had also noted Desplanier's discoveries and Dr. Maïs's contribution on the standing stones of Tunidaro, a village in French Sudan at the time. Observing the mystery, these remains posed for the current inhabitants of the region. The Senegalese researcher had tried to find the meaning of the expression Tundidaro in Wolof and translated it as the Hills of Unity. In his opinion, the people who still practice the worship of standing stones in the region are the people of the Serer. Babakar Sedik Diouf expresses reservations both about R. Moni's opinion in favor of Songhai etymology and C.A. Diop's opinion in favor of Wolof etymology. He demonstrates that the expression Otun Dari means in Serer the place of the ordeal. He wonders if megalithism was not linked to initiatory cults. In our view, the path to demonstrate which etymology, Songhai, Wolof, or Serer, would be the best is a dead end. As we have tried to show throughout our reflection on the ancient geography of Africa, one must take into account the long duration in the study of population movements and terms. The route cleared by the possible migrations of the Serer anthroponym is quite plausible, namely from the banks of the Nile to the banks of the Senegal River, passing through the Niger. The migration of the term is supported by Nigerian oral traditions and origin myths. Myth of Njajan Njai. Wolof linguistics allow for the acceptance of the Serer substrate. Already in the 19th century, Yoro Dyao gave a much broader meaning to the term Serer. The Serer, he said, is a people who remained in the last stage of the primitive state and is very attached to a kind of particular idolatry in which noticeable traces of ancient Kemetic mythology can be observed. This idolatry, the source of the Tiedo state, let's call it Tiedoism, a social name SPN in Senegambia, including the Serer, for all those who are not Muslims, probably comes from a corrupted form. From this Kemetic mythology, given that the general opinion throughout the Senegambia is that our region owes its settlement to migrations from Kemet, from which all its populations descend, Marcel Mohamed Youf defines the Serer entity as follows. Serer society counts more than 1.5 million souls, all groups combined, which is 19% of the population of Senegal. They inhabit the central western part of the country, in the Peanut Basin, located north of the Gambia. They are mainly peasants, farmers primarily, but also herders and fishermen on the coast. Their dominant trait is a strong attachment to their traditions. In relative contrast to other neighboring ethnicities, they are notably resistant to imported religions, although they include Muslims and Christians who have recently converted in a country with a strong Muslim majority. The Serer Sinai territory in particular is so densely populated that colonies had to be relocated to the new lands of eastern Senegal due to soil depletion. Additionally, as has occurred in the past, a long cycle of drought has struck the country and the entire Sahel since the early 1970s. Hence, the much-awaited intervention of saltigues, seers, priests, and rainmakers. This society formed in ancient times from the encounter and integration of different migratory waves from pre-colonial empires and kingdoms of the sub-region. Coming to settle in the center-west of Senegal, the Serers are both cousins of the Tukulor and Fulani in the north, the Diolas in the south, and the Lebu in the west. They have been linked to them since ancient times by a pact of non-aggression, a pact of perpetual peace. Mandi groups have contributed to the settlement of Serer lands. These groups are therefore also related to them. Long cohabitation has forged multiple neighborly ties and conviviality, as well as numerous marital solidarities with the Wolofs. Indeed, the Serer accept the Wolofs, live amicably with the Mandings, grant quarters to the Fulanis, and mix with the Tukuleur, with whom there is kinship. Thus the entirety of what has become today, through successive assimilations, a homogeneous ethnicity with a single language, has stored in its collective consciousness an impressive number of layers of images, witnesses to departures, encounters, confrontations, and alliances. These images are illustrated and reactivated in the ethnic memory through myths, tales, legends, and narratives. It is from this reservoir of layers of images that the guardians of the symbolic field, the griots, the artists, and popular creativity abundantly draw. And since this historical cultural source, which still surfaces here more than elsewhere, is common to other Senegalese ethnicities, it inspires both local artists and writers as well as those from neighboring groups. This dynamic presentation, which integrates diachrony and synchrony, could be even more nuanced. Indeed, it has not yet been demonstrated that the Serer have a single and unique language, and it is not obvious that all variants of the so-called Serer language are dialectal variants. In his monumental work devoted to the Serer, Henri Gavron, even though he does not believe in the use of the term Serer before the 10th century of our era, even if he rejects the use of the term Proto-Serer used by Bubu Hama, he recognizes that the process of forming the Serer Cosaan people, Serer of origins, can start from antiquity, the oldest source probably being Ancient Kemet. The meetings with the Saharan Berbers being also admitted, as well as their relations with the Empire of Ghana. The etymology of the term, which he relates to the Pular, Serab, to separate Sererabi, the separated, is debatable. It seems to us to be a late phenomenon linked to the introduction of Islam. We could better exploit the indication concerning the lake Sero and the possibilities offered by repeating Sero Sero. President Senghor, in prefacing the work, showed all the merit of the author and the important conclusions which he achieved. However, Henri Gavron, while taking stock of the work concerning the Serer, is conscious of the questions that remain, also recalling the works of Henri Bouleg, Charles Becker, and Victor Martin. He posed many questions. What is the type of proto-historic settlement with which the Serer came into contact during their settlement in the current Serer countries? Who were these mysterious Sus people? Were the Sus settlements absorbed by the Serer, or did they leave their territory? What are the links with the Serer settlements of the northwest, Safin, Noon, Nundut, whose linguistic originality poses a problem? In any case, he's right to say that clarifying the issue of Serer origins is also contributing to the history of Senegal. We could add to the history of West Africa and to the clarification of the great African migrations. We even think that this question is part of the great challenges posed to universal historiography. The decisive element in our argumentation is the association of the Serer with the Sin region, a term found in Ptolemy in relation to the unknown land east of the land of the Saints. Ptolemy I, 17, 4, and 7th, 3. The capital of the Saints and the city of Serra are represented on his maps on solid ground. A careful examination of the passages concerning the land of the Saints cannot fail to raise questions. In one passage, it is said that the inhabited part of the earth ends in the east by an unknown country adjacent to the eastern peoples of Greater Asia, to the Signs and Serica. On the southern side, by an equally unknown country, which includes the Indian Sea, and by that which surrounds the southern part of Libya, the country called Agisimba. To the west, by an unknown land that encompasses the Ethiopian Gulf of Libya, and by the Western Ocean along which extend the most western parts of Libya and Europe. Finally, towards the Bears. Ptolemy VII in Abihalma, page 72. In another passage, the author returns to his informants. We also have other more specific details from them about India, as well as its kingdoms and the interior of that country, up to the Golden Chersonese, and from there to Katagara. They all agree in saying that the sailors who go there head eastward, those who return go westward. And they also all say that the duration of this navigation is irregular and inconsistent. They add that the Seres and their capital city are located above, to the north of, the Signs, and that the more eastern lands are unknown, covered with marshy ponds, where reeds grow so large that, when well joined together, they serve to cross these marshes. They also say that not only does the road lead from there to Bactria, passing by the stone tower, but also that it leads to India through Palimbotra. but the road from the capital of the Ceres to the port of Cattigara tends southwest, and therefore it does not fall under the meridian that passes through the Ceres and Cattigara, as Marin says, but under one of the more eastern meridians, Ibidem Fui, 70th Abe Halma, page 45. Faced with these ambiguities, G. Aujak thought that Ptolemy actually distinguishes northern China with Sera, perhaps Lanzhou, around 38 degran and 103 degee in the province of Gansu, and southern China, reached by Cattigara, towards Oki, Eo, and Saigon at 10 deginon and 106 degee E, or towards Hanoi at 21 degee N and 106 degee E. How to resolve the identification between Africa and Asia? Which interpretation is the most relevant? Certainly, the etymology of China has been sought from this term, postulating moreover that the first information concerning this country came from the Scythians. But can we ignore the African track when Syria rhymes with Syene in Senegal with the possibility of Kemetic enlightenment? Our hypothesis to resolve the apparent contradiction in Ptolemy is to consider that for him the eastern and western extremities meet. Even consider that he may have had oral traditions as sources of information. It is not excluded that there may have been a tradition mentioning the Ser, Sin, living near Agisimba. Thus, in addition to hypotheses about the unknown Greek written sources used by Ptolemy, hypotheses formulated by Dosage, and/or Tyrian sources considered by Abe Halma, it is appropriate to add a probable oral tradition. Moreover, Lloyd A. Brown did not fail to point out the major error made by Ptolemy in dealing with the configuration of the Far East and its relations with Africa. Many faults appear in Ptolemy's picture of southern Asia, although for more than a century, commercial relations between Western India and Alexandria had been flourishing. An important document entitled The Periplus of the Erythraean, Indian, c. 80 AD, containing sailing directions from the Red Sea to the Indus and Malabar, indicated that the coast from Barigaza, Barak, had a general southerly trend down to and far beyond Cape Korami, Comorin, and suggested a peninsula in southern India. Ptolemy, apparently following Marinus, ignored this document, or else he never saw it, because his India was unduly broadened and foreshortened. Eratosthenes, as reported by Strabo, reported that the southern capes of India lay opposite to Meroe. For the most part, the lands beyond the Ganges were not well known until 1,000 years later, when the brothers Polo first acquainted Western Europe with the existence of a number of large islands in that part of the world. And there were no good maps of the East Indian archipelago until after the Portuguese voyages to the Indies. The legendary island of Taprobane, whose size had always been grossly overestimated, was not improved by Ptolemy, who extended it through 15 degranus of longitude and 12 degranum of latitude, making it about 14 times as large as it really was, and extending its southerly tip more than 2 degrees below the equator. Even in the more familiar territory of the Mediterranean basin, Ptolemy erred in many important cartographical details. His Mediterranean was about 20 degrees too long, and even after correcting his lineal value of a degree, it was still about 500 geographical miles too long. His Mare Nostrum from Marseille to the opposite point on the coast of Africa was 11 degrees of latitude, actually 612 degrees. Would there be confusion between African Sin and Asian Sin, the latter which Cosmas II, 4546, indeed renders well by Tsinista, southern China, perhaps to avoid any ambiguity? Then Ptolemy's error would have no historical equivalent, with however a less decisive impact than that of Columbus, who arrived in America believing he had discovered India. Another consequence of Ptolemy's abuses has been noted by R. Rebafat regarding the lack of North African tribes. Ptolemy's text Ivo, E5, on the distribution of the tribes of Tingitane may, it seems, be explained more fully. The essential difficulty arises from the fact that it locates the Zegrensi after the Puron Pedion, and in any case, under the Nectibers, far to the south of Volubilis. But now we know where the Zegrensi are, where the Banubai are, and where the Vakuatai are. Furthermore, Ptolemy himself, at the beginning of the text, suggests a columnar arrangement that simply needs to be followed to arrive at it. So, on the straight, we have the metagonist for, on one hand, the Sokosi and the verbs, and on the other hand, the mazikes and the verbicae, obviously similar or related to the verbs. Then comes the series Zegrensi, Banubai, Vakuatai. We know that they were not south of the Makanitai and the Purompediont, as the Vakuatai obviously merges with the Bakuatai. There must have been an abusive transfer southward of ethnic groups that were at the same latitude as the previous ones. After giving the reconstructed list, he concludes, to reconcile this corrected scheme with reality, it must be borne in mind that Ptolemy's Tingitane is a narrow rectangle elongated from north to south, and that the orientation of the west coast is erroneous, inclining southeast instead of tending towards the southeast. This too, narrow fan, pushes names southward for which there is no room. What allows us to consider the hypothesis of the two Siin, or Sines, is the attestation of Siin Ghana in Arab texts, especially in Al-Bakri, in the 11th century CE, as highlighted by the Islamologist and Arabist Salio Kanji, demonstrating through the same occasion that the origin of the Senegalese toponym is indeed linked to this term and not to the Zenaga Berbers, Faid Herbe's hypothesis, nor to the popular etymology Sunugal, our canoe, thesis reported by Abbe Boylat. The shift from Asia to Africa, or the repositioning of the Serer people in Africa, if we integrate the Egyptological dimension, in the Nile region, not far from the Red Sea, on an island surrounded by two arms of a river named Ser. Their Ethiopian or Scythian or mixed origin are parts of the mystery. In any case, whether for the maximalist track, Sudano-Sahelian identification, or minimalist, Maghreb, landmarks are once again offered by the linguistic track. Indeed, what is said about the Sorai in relation to the Sira River, CFI J. Desanque, Catalogue PA 69, dialogues with what is said in certain sources, Pausanias 49, about the Seres of the Nile. Moreover, do these rivers Sira or Ser not bring us back to Gir, Ger, Njer, Jir, Geon, etc.? How to explain the relations between Gir, Ger, Njer, Jir, Geon? By onomatopoeia, alliteration, contamination? One possible explanation could be the specialization of the SR roots for beings called living. Sar in Wolof refers to the idea of a human cry, or almost human. Jar for objects called inanimate. Jarjar intensifier for the expression of heat. Boiling tangjer. Jere expresses the movement of water that is poured to make it warm. The nu and the mu refer to calm water. Both connotations are found in mut, keep silent. Here it is about an opportune silence, either because it is wise or because it is imposed on you, while num expresses the same idea, but in a negative register. It means to keep silent, while the situation requires expressing an opinion, as in the expression numa aral. All this expresses well the complexity of human expression, reflecting the complexity of reality or realities. Concerning the liquid element, we realize that there is not only the raging sea or the calm river. Water can flow calmly, docks, endocks, decks. It can be furious, ginex, ngax. It can rustle like in a stream. Gongani, in Wolof, expresses well this muted sound. Isn't this also an indication for our famous Diopian, one of the names of the Nile? Even if the question is not settled, whether the term is borrowed from Hebrew or not. What is interesting is that one of the proposed exegeses also refers us to onomatopoeia, to the rustling of a hot water source. It is necessary to stop and recognize that reflecting on the Serer is thus reflecting on Senegal, Africa, and above all, on the history of human beings.